Hey everyone, welcome back to Citywide Blackout, your home for music, movies, and more. I'm your host, Max Bowen. Poet Quinn Bailey has always had a strong connection to the natural world, so much so that it's become his career. His new book, The Currents of the World, collects a variety of poems shaped by witnessing, again and again, the power of nature. In this episode, Quinn and I talk about the origins of the book and how he came to the attention of Homebound Publications. He looks back to how he first connected with nature and his favorite settings for writing his poems. My next guest, he has just published his first book of poetry called The Currents of the World, and you definitely want to check this one out. It's some amazing work. Author Quinn Bailey joins me. Quinn, welcome to the show. It's great having you here.
Hey, Max. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Okay.
Pleasure to be here.
You describe the book as a book that is meant to live in your backpack. I love that phrasing. I'm curious why you chose those words to kind of sum up the book.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think why I originally chose that was a common theme in the book is nature and being out in the world, in the natural world, and so much of my inspiration comes from that. And it's like when I'm writing, it's like I don't just want to write to share my experience, although that is part of it. It's like really what I want to do is I want to inspire other people to go out into the woods and experience nature. And I feel like sometimes when you read about nature, it can sometimes be like it sort of takes the place of actually going out and doing the thing yourself. Because like, oh, I read about it and had this great experience, but it's like you're kind of like, oh, well, I've done that. So I think I put that in there because I really wanted people to actually go out into the woods and with the book, just because that's something the way I really like enjoying poetry is taking it out with me and going on walks or hikes or whatever and reading it to the natural world. So yeah, it was a little bit of a way to inspire people in that way.
I like that idea because I think you're right. People will sometimes read a book about this thing and they'll say, okay, I did this thing. But it's like, no, go and actually do the thing. Don't just read about it.
Yeah.
Go and do it. And
totally. Yeah, I think so much of, entertainment in general, books, movies, music, whatever it is, like there's a lot of it I think is geared towards sort of like, it's like you experience it, but it has like sort of a numbing down effect as opposed to an inspiring effect, and so the stuff that I really love is the stuff that's inspiring, gets you out there and gets you going.
And you are definitely no stranger to the natural world. You're a naturalist, a wildlife tracker, an educator. You've been doing this for many years, really connecting folks to the natural world. How did you find yourself in this line of work?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So I think it really started because as a kid, I grew up on Orcas Island, which is a small island off the coast of Washington. And I had a pretty free range childhood, I guess I would say. Like there wasn't a lot to worry about, a very close community, not a lot of there's not a lot of dangers. Like you can't really get lost on an island for very long. Like eventually you hit the water, and you kind of know where you are. So I was able to really be out in the nature a lot. So that was kind of the foundation of it. But I never really got the sense, or no one really ever told me that could be my job, that my job could have something to do with being in the natural world. And so it wasn't until years later, I was about 21 and I got kind of fed up with what I was doing and I needed a change. And so I got on my bicycle and I decided to take a bicycle tour trip and I rode down the West Coast and I camped basically the whole way. So it was a couple months of just camping and riding, and it was really on that trip that I just sort of had an epiphany of sorts where it was just oh, right, the thing that I have loved consistently through my life has been being in nature, and maybe I could do that. Maybe how do I have that be my job? And then I looked up schools that I just typed in nature school or wilderness survival school. And there happened to be one in Washington, really amazing organization called the Wilderness Awareness School. They have adult classes. So I went and I took these two 1 year long classes with them. They're fully immersive. And it's just yeah, it was awesome. It was life-changing doing that. And that really sparked in me, not only did it like give me direction in sort of my work, um, but also that's where the rediscovery of my love of poetry came from. Was the instructors were really, really good about using poetry at certain like particular peak moments, to either sort of begin or end an experience that we've had. And if you've spent a bit of time out in the woods, it gets you into a pretty raw and receptive state. And then to like hear these, like hear Mary Oliver, David White, Adrian Rich, those kinds of people, it was just like, it just sunk in on a different level. And I was like, wow. And it was like one of those things though, where if it was moving, but also it brought up like a little bit of jealousy, it's like, oh, I want to do that, or I think I could maybe do that. And that was sort of like a sign for me. It was like, oh, right. Like jealousy actually indicates that maybe there's someone doing something that you like want to do, So yeah. So anyway, I completed those 2 years with them, and then I was lucky enough that a position opened up with their teen programs, and I got a job running some of their teen programs, and I did that for the next 5 years. And I've actually since I did that, and then I worked with a number of different age groups, including adults, taking people out and teaching them. It's kind of like, on one level, it's like survival skills, right? Like that's kind of, I think, kind of a selling point. It's like we teach these like awesome survival skills and really, really, really good things to know how to do, how to build a fire, how to build a shelter, how to find food, how to find water. But within that, also the things that I don't think people think about very much are like how to relate with other humans is as much a survival skill, and one that humans have been dependent on since the beginning, as learning how to make fire or build a shelter. And, people often, I think, forget that there's this whole different set of skills that really are survival skills if you want to have anything resembling a good life, I think. Yeah. So I learned a lot of that stuff there too. And just recently with the whole COVID thing, I ended up, because we went online for a bit, I ended up coming back to Orcas Island, and that's actually where I am now. And I decided that, just seeing the way I'm staying on my mom's property here and helping out around the house here. And so I'm no longer working for the Wilderness Awareness School, and I'm focusing more on writing and just taking care of the land here that I grew up on, which has been a whole other journey of just getting to know this place again. And I think there's something so nourishing about being on a land and being around people too that have known you since you were a small child. Like there's something about that it feels really special, and it was definitely what was needed in my life right now.
You tell people that you do this kind of work, wildlife tracking, educating, not being a naturalist. I imagine they get a lot of pictures in their head about what your life is like. How accurate are those pictures usually?
Well, that's I don't know. I guess I don't want to make assumptions about what pictures pop up in people's minds, but I think people don't realize how, like, I say I'm a wildlife tracker. It's like, that's because that's something that I love to do. And I've taken trainings in it and done a lot of wonderful courses. There's an organization called the Cyber Tracker, which is not, the name is kind of misleading. It doesn't really have anything to do with cyber, but it has to do with tracking animals. And so I've done a number of trainings with them, and I've definitely, like done that. But wildlife tracking for me, like as you learn it, it's like so many things. It just becomes part of how you live your life. So it's like, as I'm constantly going around, I'm checking mud puddles, or I'm walking down by the beach and looking at animal tracks and things like that. And what I've really tried to do recently, because I'm no longer sort of working, it's not my primary job teaching these things, is just integrating these sort of routines of noticing the natural world into my daily life as much as I can, and really getting to know my place here. And it's like, Orcas Island is relatively tame in terms of wildlife, because it's an island, it's small, humans have been here for a long time, and so it's like not really big animals to track and that kind of thing. but like there's still so much to notice. So like, I go spend my mornings, I get my coffee, and me and my girlfriend will go, and we have a routine of going and sitting out in the yard and just like seeing what the birds are up to. And you start to get to know the birds, and it becomes sort of like it's like a sitcom, like it's like a really kind of sort of slow moving sitcom, but it also, you get sort of addicted in the same way where you're like, you don't want to miss an episode kind of thing. Which is fun. So it's been fun to discover sort of the wildness of my own backyard.
You talked earlier about how this work kind of got you back into poetry, but what made you want to start writing your own work, your own poems?
It almost felt like it wasn't even a decision. I'd been listening, people had been reading these poems at the school, and I'd been sort of getting exposed to the poetry and sort of realizing like, wow, like feeling very moved by it, and I sat, but I didn't really have any thoughts or plans to write my own really. And then I sat down, because at the end of the year we have like a small graduation thing. And I was supposed to speak at that. And so I get super nervous speaking in front of people. And so I always do a lot of like note taking beforehand and pre-planning. And I've gotten a little better about it. But anyway, so I sat down to write, just kind of plan out what I was going to say. And just this poem came out, and I didn't really know what it was. And it ended up being the title poem of my new book, The Currents of the World. But yeah, I wrote it, and there was something happened in that where it was like inside, I just had this feeling like, oh, this is something I do now. And it wasn't like, oh, you'll do it for, I do it for money or do it for these things. It was just like, no, this is just like something you do now. And it doesn't matter if you're good at it or not, like you're not doing it for other people kind of thing. But yeah, it was just this clear thing like, oh, okay, I guess I do this now. And I was surprised at how little. Are you familiar with the idea of like the predator voice? Like that sort of like when you decide to try and do something, there's always that little voice that tells you, you're small, or well, how dare you, or how could you think that you could do that kind of thing, sure. And I was really surprised that just wasn't really there for this. It was just kind of like, no, yeah, you do this now. And then, it was probably 6 months before I wrote another poem. And then it was like 4 months after that, and, maybe a month after that. But, that was 7 years ago. And so now it's just become more of a regular thing. And so it was that sort of feeling combined with, I won't say that there wasn't that when I shared some of my poetry, I did get good feedback. I got feedback on it. And that, of course, I think sometimes we downplay how important it is to get encouragement like that, especially when you're starting out a creative endeavor. So,
oh yeah,
I got a lot of great encouragement, and that helped me a lot too.
One thing I've noticed is that when people decide they want to start pursuing art as a career, whether it's writing or making movies or making music, there's always that, well, what if it doesn't work out? Or what's your real job going to be? There's always those kinds of questions, which is like the automatic, I don't believe that you can do it. But it's good that you didn't have that. It's good that you always got that support. Reading this work and knowing what I know about you, I can definitely envision you just like being in the middle of this gigantic forest, miles into the woods, just you and a pad of paper writing your work. But I imagine that's probably a little far from the truth. But what is your ideal setting, especially given that your work is all about nature?
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's something that I find really funny as I've kind of learned more about my own poetry writing style as I read other people, is like, yeah, there's often that, like when I read, a really great like Jim Harrison poem or something, like in my mind, he's right there in that moment writing it. But like so much of poetry happens at the writing desk after the fact. And it might even be a mixture of 5 or 6 different experiences that are sort of coming in to create this one sort of poem or this one sort of image. So I think in my ideal world, I would be out all the time walking in the woods and just writing verses as they came to me. But I mean, I have a job and I'm busy like everybody else. So I find that really what my sort of strategy is, I think of it like I collect a bunch of little pieces. So I always have a notebook or even like the notes app on my phone is super great just because I have it with me all the time. And, as I'm out, like a line will come to me or an image or like someone will say something and sometimes that'll trigger something. Like I've had this weird experience where like sometimes someone will say something and it's almost like it just like is a little bit brighter than everything else. There's something about the way the words work together. And I'm like, oh, there's like some energy in there. And so I was just like, okay, I'll write that down. And the tricky part is to not start writing the whole poem as you're writing down these little notes, but I'll like collect these little, I put them in my little bag, so to speak. And then when I have time and, I'd like to say I write every day, which I've been trying to get better at, but I definitely don't. It comes in all kinds of, the schedule is, I don't set the schedule is what I've learned. So it just comes when it comes, but I'll sort of sit down and then I'll pull out my little, all my little notes and kind of just like read through them and see what kind of sparks from there. That's generally how it happens. Every once in a while, it'll just be like something will feel like it comes out fully baked already. It's just kind of like, all right, here's a poem, and you just have to kind of you write it down, and that works. The thing I've been liking doing recently is what I used to do is I'd be writing a poem and then I get stuck on something and I would just like sit there with that thing and just like kind of hammer at it and just drive myself sort of crazy because I couldn't feel like I got it right. So what I've been doing recently, and I think this kind of fits with just my sort of, slightly ADD personality, is I'll just have like multiple poems out, whether it's writing them by hand or up on my computer. And I'll just be like, okay, I'll work on one for a little bit. And then like, as soon as I hit a little stopping point, I just switch to another poem. Like I don't let myself get bogged down. And then there'll be something there and I'll write that. And then it's like, I come to a little place where I'm like, I don't know. I don't feel like I'm getting stuck, and I'll just switch to something else. And so far it's worked really good as a way to just kind of like not letting myself get stuck in that sort of like, I wouldn't call it writer's block, but just like, a creative knot, you might say, that you come to friction point.
Now, obviously, writing poetry is a lot different than if you're writing a novel. There's no characters, there's no plot, there's no action, there's no conflict. So how do you work on it? How do you kind of tweak it to get to the point where you can say, okay, this is done, I'm satisfied?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I'm still figuring that out. It's kind of a mystery. I don't know. Like, I think on one level, I'm really attracted to poetry because it doesn't have all those things. It doesn't have all that structure. And I think I was also attracted to poetry because I just don't like writing. And I know that's like a weird thing for a poet to say, but like, I think it probably a lot from like public education systems that I was in at different times. Like my experience of writing was these just like miserable experiences of like having to write about something that you weren't interested in and having to be at a deadline and you're going to get graded or you have to read it in front of the class or whatever. And just really kind of scarring in a way. And so I'm still sort of working through that. Oh no, like writing can be fun. Writing, like I've never been like keeping a journal or that kind of thing. So I think I like poetry because it is so short form. But in terms of like, knowing when it's done and things like that, it's really just a feel thing. I think I've definitely had times where I'm like, oh, I should have ended this poem like a while ago. Like you have to kind of go back and just catch yourself, because there is a tendency to want to constantly fiddle with things. Because I don't know, for me, there is a certain, like, I love games and puzzles and things like that, and there's a certain part of poetry that really appeals to my mind that way, where it's kind of like it's like you're trying to create this game or puzzle, but with sort of like images that you're sort of sending to somebody else's brain, which is just like a wild thing. But yeah, there's a lot, like really like getting strategic or figuring out what is the best way to fit these different lines together, and what is, which image needs to come first, and all that kind of stuff. I just really love that stuff, but I do take it too far sometimes, or it's like, it has to be a point where it's like, okay, no, it's done. And often sometimes the earlier versions I find are actually the better ones. And if I spend too much time on them, they lose something. I'm not sure, it's like, over-processed music or something like that. I don't know.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Now, when you began writing this, was it always your plan to publish it either on their own or in a book?
Yeah, I mean, I think initially when I started writing, I was a little bit, I didn't know. It was kind of like I had that feeling of just like, oh, this is something I'm supposed to do. I just write poetry now, and it's not necessarily for anything. And then as I got more into reading poetry and like, having poetry books, I think somewhere in there was the feeling of like, okay, well, one, it was like, do I believe in my work? Do I believe that it has value to other people? And I think that's an important thing for like all artists to really get clear on. It's like, do you think your own work has value? Because if you go and stand behind your work, then like, how can you expect other people to stand behind it? So I think there's that journey there for me. And then, yeah, there was like, yeah, I think I would like to see it completed or in some kind of form where I could share it with other people. I think that was the big impetus for that. And I kind of went about it a little bit backwards. The normal sort of route that I've heard about anyway is like, you submit to magazines first and you get published in magazines and then you like put together a thing. And I kind of skipped the magazine thing. Like I didn't get published in magazines until after I had the book deal with Homebound. And so, yeah, but I think it was like from the time when I got published and when I decided like, oh, I want to like put together a manuscript, there's probably like 4 years in there, because when I first decided, like, I didn't know anything about, publishing or any of that kind of stuff, or even really like, I didn't know that much about poetry. And I still feel like I don't in some ways. Like I feel woefully uneducated when it comes to poetry. I just know that I love it and I know the poetry that I love. And so I read that and then get inspired. Yeah, so like the first draft of the manuscript was like way too short and just like, yeah, like not, I would submit it to these like big time publishers, just not really knowing what I was doing and kind of not being calibrated, I guess, to sort of the publishing world. But yeah, and then slowly that kind of started to change and I started to like, okay, I got more poems and I would you start to read other poetry books a little bit differently, not only for the poems, but also for like, how is the book created? And why are they putting these poems in this order, like, and all these different things. And as I started to kind of see those things more and become aware of those things, I got the idea for the book, and sort of that idea sort of became more solid and more like a possibility.
Working with Homebound Publications, and big thanks to them because they're the ones who got all this together. How did you come to their attention? What was it like working with them?
Yeah, it's been great. I'd heard about them just from doing searches and stuff for publishers. They like a lot of small presses, instead of doing sort of like an open call for submissions, they do a poetry contest, which I think is a really great thing because it at least guarantees that you're going to get your manuscript in front of, someone, so at least someone's going to read it, and so to speak, someone who maybe has some influence. So I submitted to one of their poetry contests. I then kind of, it's kind of those things, like those things take so long to hear back from you. You just kind of like send them out, and then it's like, you might be waiting like 2 or 3 months until you hear back. And so they kind of just disappear into the cloud of submissions that you've sent out. And it was August, I think. And I was on an expedition, or I was leading a summer program with teens. We were out for like 6 days with like minimal gear, like really kind of out there, like minimal gear, minimal food, like really getting sort of feral, you might say. And we had this great, really powerful experience, great group of teens. And I was coming back from that, and I always try and like wait a little bit to turn my phone back on when I'm coming back from those kinds of things. And I was driving back home, and I finally did turn my phone on, and the email from Leslie popped up, and it was just saying like, hey, like, we're really interested in your manuscript. We'd love to, we want to publish it. And it was just like, after having such a powerful week, and then just like to come out to that was such that was awesome. It was an awesome experience. And then, working with them was great. I mean, I didn't really know what to expect. And, I had a conversation with Leslie, and I looked more at the press, and I just loved sort of their mission and sort of the way that they do business, and that their values are very much in line with my values, it feels like. And I feel like that is such a gift you always hear kind of like horror stories about, having their control taken from them and stuff. And I didn't experience any of that. I think I was paranoid about it and maybe a little overprotective at times, but Leslie was really good at just, reassuring me. And it was such a collaborative effort, which I just love. Well, since then, the book coming out, it's been good, especially Homebound's awesome because they just have a lot of connections in the literary world and are able to actually, like, a lot of small presses have a lot of great talent, but have a hard time getting the books out there to, the major distributors and stuff. And so they have those connections. And then I just love all the other people on the press. There's a nice sort of community that's built up around it.
Mm-hmm. I was really curious about the cover for this because it's a beautiful cover. Was there a lot of like back and forth before you settled on something that you really liked?
There was definitely a lot of back and forth in my mind. The cover design was something that I cared about a lot. I just think that I think covers are super important, and I've always really been a very visual person. I love visually striking things, and so I would just I had the title down. I knew I wanted to call it The Currents of the World. I didn't really ever shift on that, but man, I just went through this whole gamut of different covers, and I'd see I'd see a picture, and then I'd be like, oh yeah, I love this. This would be great. Yeah, we have this thing in here, and then a week later I'd see something else and get inspired by that. At one point, I was pretty sure I wanted it to be this. There's this like early 1900s Danish illustrator named Kay Nielsen who does these great like folktale and fairy tale illustrations. So I was like pretty sure I wanted one of his pieces on there because they're in the public domain now. I was pretty set on that. And then there was all these different kinds of things. And then I found that picture and it was just like, oh, nope, this is the one. Like, this is so clearly the one. And I was really glad that I showed it to Leslie, and I showed her that one and a couple of others, but I was like, okay, here's this one, and then here's some others, but really this one, like, this is the one I want. And she was on board. She saw it too, and she was like, yep, that one, I agree, that's the one. And there's something that I love about it. Just feels very kind of archetypal, that sort of coming out of the cave, and then the ocean out there, and just especially because water is, it's in the name, the currents of the world, but also just I write about water a lot. I find that water imagery comes into my work a lot, and sometimes I have to work to write about something else. But I'm very, very happy with the cover. And then Leslie worked her magic and created the title font and where to place everything, and I'm happy with it.
I'm very much a novice at poetry, so hopefully this will make some sense. But reading your stuff, I kind of get a nice blend of the simple and the complex. You're very upfront with the way you write. You don't bury me in metaphors and so forth, but you touch on a lot of different subjects. You look on like the beauty of nature, the joy of dancing, digging through wounds to find the things that really matter, trusting growth to happen in its time. How did you come to this style? How did you sort of craft your own unique viewpoint?
I think that's one of the things that's so freeing about poetry, is that, like a poetry book particularly, it doesn't have to have a through theme. Like there's poetry books that do and sort of have a central theme to them. But I think really, like, poetry is so much about like what you notice and then what you have to say about it. That's so broad. Like, it can be just about anything. So I felt that way about this book, where it was like, oh, I can, like, I don't want to start just pigeonholing myself. I'm like, oh, this is a book about nature. This is a book about these things, or to think too much about the sort of the theme going in. I think sure that themes might kind of emerge later, but I think that going into it thinking about those things wouldn't really serve me. So I think of it as sort of like, oh yeah, each book, hopefully there'll be more, and they're just like, it's just a snapshot of like, oh, here are the things I've been noticing lately and what I have to say about them. So I think that's where that came from. It's just like the things I write about are the things that I care about or have felt or, feel strongly about.
How does it feel to have it done? It's there. You've got the physical copies in your hands. How does it feel to have this box checked off your life to-do list?
It feels good. Yeah, it feels good. I think like I see it and I have it, and I, I am proud of it. Like I feel pride at it. I feel like I did it well, but there also simultaneously was like this feeling of, well, one, it's so delayed. You sign the contract and you find out that it's going to be made a book, but then in the publishing world, it's like it doesn't actually come out for a year. It's like a year later that it comes out, and so initially when it first came, I was like, oh, cool, like this is awesome, this is great, but it's also like, okay, let me backtrack just a little bit, because I guess the other thing is that not only does it take a year for the book to come out, but some of the poems in the book I might have written 4 or 5 years ago, because it's my first book of poetry. And so it's like there is a feeling of like, okay, well, it's old news, on to the next thing, like as soon as it's kind of done and out there, it was like, okay, yeah, on to the next thing. And I definitely felt that with this book, that when it came out, like out into the public, there was definitely a lot of excitement and apprehension and those things that come with it. But also it was sort of gratefully liberating, I would say, to have it, to not be so like wrapped up in it, to feel like, okay, yeah, I'm happy with it, but also I'm on to the next thing. I'm on to these, the next thing I'm writing, these new poems and stuff like that. It kind of allows you to be a little bit detached from it, which I think is actually a good thing.
Yeah, I can get that. You don't like rest on your laurels and say, okay, I'm an official poet now, and I have a book. You're like, okay, it's done, but like
right.
you've already got your next project in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like I'm interested in what is the next thing. What's the next thing I can do? There's a little I've noticed just as I'm working on the next book and everything. It's like how am I unconsciously already feeling pigeonholed by this book, of like, oh, this is what my readers expect. So how do I kind of branch out from that, and just like continue? I don't want to like try too hard to like, go off in a totally different direction, but I just don't want to feel like I'm restricting myself because of what I think people want to hear, because it's like trying to guess what people want to hear. Like it's just gonna, it distorts things, I think. It makes it a little less authentic.
Something I've been asking a lot of folks, just given the time that we're in, and did COVID really impact your ability to do like signings? Did you have like a book tour lined up? Did you have all these plans made that all of a sudden had to get shelved because of this?
Yeah, well, two things sort of happened that were unexpected because of it. Because it was sort of, I mean, it came out August 11th, this last summer, so it was kind of right in all of that stuff. But two things happened, or it was slated to come out August 11th, I should say. And two things happened. The COVID thing hit, and so Leslie at Homebound, I think, made the very smart decision to release a bunch of the summer releases early, because everybody was home, everybody was ordering books, so there was sort of this there was kind of this unexpected, like, oh, and I'd been off of like taking some space from social media, and so I didn't actually get a lot of that communication. And then so one of my friends texted me like, oh, I just got a copy of your book, and I was like, oh, what? And it worked it all out. But so that was sort of unexpected. It was this kind of early release, but it wasn't an official release. It was just through Homebound's website. And then when it did come out, there was all the, like doing a reading and stuff like that was just kind of off the table. It just wasn't going to go. And it felt like a double-edged sword for me, because one, it was like, those things I think are really good to do. And I do really enjoy sharing my poetry, particularly out loud. But then on the other side, like, I'm a pretty shy person, and I don't like, I was relieved. There was some relief in not having to go out and be, this person out in front of people. So that part, I wasn't like, oh no, everything's ruined. It was kind of like, well, okay, well, I'll just keep writing, and there is channels to put things out, like, being on this podcast and social media, and do an Instagram thing and all that kind of stuff. So didn't feel like I didn't have access to people to share my poetry with. But yeah, I definitely now I'm I just started working in the local bookstore, and I'm like, man, it would be so fun to just have a little reading, and just be around a group of people and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Agreed, man.
It's a wild time. It's a wild time to release, to be doing any kind of art, but I think it's also a time when we need art. We need art more than ever, I think.
Oh yeah, we absolutely need art. We need, whether it's music or a book or a movie, we need that thing to sort of, I think, take the pressure off, to not necessarily distract us, because it's hard to be distracted from what's going on in the world. But it's good to have something else to focus on. Like I said, take some space from social media, stop reading the news all day, do something that makes you happy instead of something that just stresses you the hell out.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And I think that artists in particular have, I think there's a lot of way to actuate change in a culture, but I think artists have a particular place that can be very subversive in a really great way. And yeah, what a time to be in any kind of art, and to try and, bring some sort of alternative story or narrative to what's maybe the cultural norm. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Quinn, we can't do an official poetry reading. We can't get you to the coffee shop, but we are going to do a reading for everyone listening here. We're going to be reading 2 poems. One is from the book, the other, brand new. You're hearing it here first. So, Quinn, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thanks, Max. I'll read a short one from the book. And then, I'll share a new one I've been working on. This one's called Wound. Tell where you are wounded. Pull it apart again and again. Stick your finger in the slippery mess. Find what was severed, and you find what is sacred to you. And then this other one, this is just recently, I think it's done. You never know with these things. But the working title is The Debt. If up is the way we go when we die, and I think it is for a while, then see now the billions of dead drifting up, rising translucent from limp forms, fish, dog, spider, tree, grass, bird, human, all shaped like what they were, but all becoming more and more related, more and more everything as they rise together like mist, like smoke, like music in the song that keeps the world in balance. See the pluming oceans, its gray whales moving like great steamers, swallowing plankton by the millions. See the hawk and pigeon meeting mid-air in a puff of smoke. See the thick wall that rises always from the cutting edge of civilization. See the thin wisps hanging above the cities, where most is dead already. See the billowing over farmlands, following the harvester, following the seasons. See the whole world a funeral pyre, cloaked in a fog of death so thick you could choke. And upon seeing it, upon knowing what has been given, would you still look away, as if you alone might avoid the debt owed by all at the end? Turn, as if we have taken nothing to be here, as if each step doesn't burn with little deaths rising like cinder, like ash as we walk through the grass.
Amazing stuff, man. Really powerful stuff. I like it.
Thanks, Max. Yeah.
So now that this book is out, what is next for you? Do you think you have another book, or is it back to like getting your stuff out to the different like magazines?
Yeah, it's been a little bit of both. I've been like slowly accumulating more poems, and definitely another book is the thing I'm excited about, and I've been kind of like, I don't want to too early put them all into one sort of manuscript. I want to let them be their own little things as I work on them. And I've been, as things come up, I'll submit them to different magazines and things like that, and waiting to hear back as always. But yeah, the next book feels like the thing that I'm most excited about.
Very cool.
Feels good now that I've moved back home and been on Orcus. It's just like feels like there's more time for writing, and my life is more geared around that, which feels really good. And I'm hoping that trend continues,
Mm-hmm. Me too, man. Me too. Well, Quinn, this has been a lot of fun, man. It's been great talking to you. Again, love the book. And folks, if you want to learn more, you go to QuinnBailey.com. Quinn, QuinnBailey.com. You can buy your copy of the book. You can check out his stuff. You can contact him and tell him how awesome he is. You should do that. Once again, Quinn, thank you so much, man. And I'm sure we'll be talking soon.
This is Angelina Singer, author of the Upper World series, and you're listening to Citywide Blackout, the best podcast for independent artists.
Picture this. You finished your first book and nailed it. The plot, the characters, all the twists and turns. This one's a winner, and all you need is the right cover. If you've got my art skills, this is the part where panic usually sets in. Enter the cover villain, hero to writers everywhere. Founded by noted author Remy Flagg, Cover Villain focuses on composite image covers for science fiction and fantasy writers. Give them the details, and they'll craft a cover using popular trends that everyone will want to see. But wait, you say, I've got ideas of my own. No problem, as Cover Villain loves a good collaboration. As they say, our goal is to put a little villain in every cover we make. Want to know more? Then head to covervillain.com and follow them on Facebook and Instagram. All right, folks, that brings this episode to a close. You can follow the show on Facebook under Citywide Blackout and Twitter and Instagram under Citywide Max. Listen to the show on Podbean, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, Amazon Music, and every Saturday at 10 p.m. on Boston Free Radio. As always, keep those ears open.